Good evening, guys. So today I wanted to make a quick video on soil. Um, if you watch Gardener's World, if you read a plant label, etc., or you're looking at a seed packet, it's going to talk about planting in a, I don't know, free draining, light soil, or I might say needs a heavy sort of moisture retentive soil. And that's all well and good, but how do you know what you've got? How do you know what you're working with naturally in your garden? So I thought I'd take this opportunity this evening just to make a quick video on how you can go out into your garden without any specialist equipment or tools or anything and kind of know what sort of soil you've got in your garden. So the first thing I want to say is don't ever despair about what soil you have. I am very convinced that for whatever soil there is a plant or a whole bunch of plants that will grow really well in your soil. So what I'm going to do here is just go through the soil I've got in my garden and how it sort of varies depending on what I've done to the soil. To sort of give you guys an indication of what you can do to maybe improve your soil or change its properties. I don't believe there's anything such thing as a bad soil, so I think improving is kind of the wrong word. It just depends on what you're trying to grow, what you're trying to plant. So if you want to know what type of soil you get, I would dig a hole, and I would dig a hole, maybe 6 inches deep or so, because if you're anything like me, you've maybe mulched or you've added something to the top of the soil, which will sort of impact on the results and things. But the soil I've got here is quite clay soil, and to find out if you've got free draining soil or quite light soil, grab a handful of the soil that you've broken up, give it a hard squeeze in your hand, and you'll see it makes lumps. It contracts together. It's still kind of crumbly, but I can make these solid kind of lumps out of it. If I grab another piece, something like this, it's already sort of formed a lump. Give it a squeeze. I can feel the moisture in it as well. That's another indicator that you've got quite clay soil. And you can see I made a nice little lump there. So that's not bad soil. That's great soil. It's got lots of nutrients in it. It's really moisture retentive. But what it means is that certain crops that, for example, don't like their roots very wet aren't going to do well in this soil. It's going to be too damp for them, too wet all, throughout the year. So something like lavender, for example, sort of a crop that comes from the sort of Mediterranean, wants it much drier and, wants its roots to be a bit drier and to only sort of get wet when it rains, etc. So it wouldn't do very well in this soil. So I'm going to quickly show you over another part of my garden, which has a bit more free draining soil, and show you the sort of difference. So we're here at a different part of the garden where I've dressed this bed with a thin layer of topsoil. Now topsoil is still quite moisture retentive. I'll give it a squeeze. It'll sort of turn into a lump, but it all kind of crumbles with only like a little bit of sort of pressure and things. So indicating it's a bit more free draining than the sort of native soil. Now this is great for growing almost every sort of plant, but there are some plants that won't like either of these soils. So I'm just going to go over to the raised beds a minute and just talk a little bit about what you can do to your soil to maybe change its properties. So, depending on the soil you've got, there are things you can do. If you've got extremely heavy clay soil that floods and it's basically like a bog, you can add sand to it, you can add grit to it, and what that will do is that will break up the structure of the soil and introduce air into the soil so it dries out quicker. You don't get as much water retention, which might be suitable for some plants. If, on the other hand, you've got very free draining soil, very rubbly soil, maybe you're growing on an ex-building site or something, you might have very free draining soil, very low nutrients in it. What you'll then need to do is add something like manure or compost, which will add nutrients and add structure to the soil and help it retain moisture. Now, that's a lot of work. You've got to do a lot of digging in. So one thing you can do, and it's not much less work if I'm honest, is you could build yourself some raised beds. Raised beds come in all sorts. Metal ones, wooden ones. These ones are just built out of quite thick decking boards, pressure treated, sort of nailed together and everything, and then filled with whatever I want it to grow in. So with this, I'm growing vegetables. So the main thing I need is compost. So I need the nutrients, I need the water retention. But a little bit sort of paradoxical, I think is the word. Having water retentive, free draining soil is very difficult. But one way you can kind of achieve that is through compost. So this feels very damp, very wet, but I give it a squeeze really hard and it crumbles away, indicating moisture, will sort of drain in it. So compost is brilliant for a lot of different plants that you want to grow things in. Only thing comes with compost is it costs or it takes time to make. So sometimes you do have to work with the soil you've got, but the key is to really just know what type of soil you got in the first place. So before you go out and buy your next plant or plant your next seedlings, go over to your bed, grab a handful of soil, get your hands dirty, and have a feel. Try to understand the soil you've got. What type of soil is it? What could you maybe do to change the properties to help you grow a different crop better? There's nothing worse than seeing a great plant in the garden centre, bringing it home, planting it, and it not flourishing. And there's lots of things it could be. It could be the exposure, it could be the levels of light or levels of water. But another thing to consider is it any good in that soil that you're growing it in? And what you really need to make sure so every gardener understands is what soil they've got, what type of soil. So I hope that sort of sheds some light on what we mean when we say heavy clay soil, what we mean by light free draining soil. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you all soon for more videos.